Hey, Detoxers. Welcome to another episode of the Disinfo Detox. Today, I am joined by Timothy Karr, the Senior Director of Strategy and Communications for Free Press. Timothy Karr, welcome to the Disinfo Detox.
Thanks for having me, Nolan. Great to be here.
Absolutely. Great to chat with you. And I'll start things off with a question that I think will get to a point of confusion some folks have. Uh, does it frustrate you at all when people mix up free press with the free press? And if so, on a scale of 1 to 10, how frustrating is it?
Well, it's yeah. So, we've been around 20 years longer than they have. We have pride of place, although we can't really claim ownership of the term free press, thank goodness. But yeah, occasionally I do get phone calls from the free press subscribers who are angry because they're not getting their subscription, and I have to inform them that I have nothing. Free press has nothing to do with that organization. So.
Okay, so for listeners out there, these are two different organizations. So, however you feel about the Free Press, that's not what we're talking about here today. We're talking about a much longer, and I would argue, much more important institution that is Free Press. And so, Tim, for folks who are listening who may not be familiar with Free Press, can you kind of give them a little summary of when did Free Press start, what's its
Sure.
purpose, and what does it do?
So we've been around for more than 20 years. We were really started through the work of the media scholar Bob McChesney, who really analyzed the media system in the United States and found that there was a structural problem, that the way that media policy, or that the media system that we have, is a byproduct of the sort of media policies that we're making, and that the public was not involved in that. And as a result, you had these very large corporations that basically overtook our media system and dictated what people see, read, and hear, and weren't always fulfilling their obligation to be the fourth estate, that is, to be a check against power, because the owners of these massive media conglomerates were the powerful themselves. And so the purpose of Free Press was to re-engage the public in policy debates and in organizing around a free press. And we fought battles over public funding for the media. We fought battles for preserving an open internet, an issue called net neutrality that some of your viewers might be familiar with. And we've been around for 20 years, and we now have 1.4 million members who are ready to pick up their phones and call their members of Congress, or get out into the streets and protest on a lot of these issues.
Nice. Yeah, it's a great organization. I went to, you guys had a conference, I think, in Denver in like 2013-ish, 12-ish. I remember I went to, and it was fabulous to see all the different work the organization is doing and be a part of so many folks who are committed to media. I'm glad to see it continues.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. Yes, well, those conferences were a part of our organization for a number of years. We had thousands of people coming to conferences to discuss media policy. It was really eye-opening. A lot of people think that these issues are really arcane and technical and hard to engage with. But we've learned that once people learn about the sort of policy debates around the future of journalism and the future of the media, they get really engaged. And they in fact, like the wonkery. They like talking about Article 2 of the Telecommunications Act, for example, which is the part of the Telecommunications Act that ensures an open internet. So it's been an interesting journey.
Nice. And you guys just recently published a Media Capitulation Index, and I want you to explain that. Well, there's another publication that accompanied it I want to talk about as well, but can you tell us what the Media Capitulation Index is and what it reveals?
Sure. As just after the November election of Donald Trump, we noticed this very unusual thing happening. Some of the most powerful and prominent media owners were sending letters of congratulations to Donald Trump, and people like Jeff Bezos said that he was super excited, his words, to be working with the Trump administration and optimistic about the plan, what's ahead. Mark Zuckerberg really bent over backwards to get in the good graces of Trump. You may recall that Trump said that Zuckerberg should spend his life in prison, but after he was elected. So we saw this happening among the richest media companies. And so we started to investigate. And we found it was just not just Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos who were kowtowing to the new president, but that there was a pattern across all of the largest media companies of capitulation, of caving to the Trump administration. So I looked at the 35 largest media companies, and these are companies that spanned across all media. We're looking at cable and telecom companies. We're looking at broadcasting and entertainment companies like Disney. We were in Sinclair. We were looking at publishers, and we were looking at online platforms. And we found this pattern of capitulation across all media, which presents a fundamental problem to our democracy. It is the media that is supposed to act as the fourth estate. That is a check against abuse by the powerful. They're supposed to speak truth to power. And a lot of these billionaire-owned companies were too intimidated by the Trump administration to fulfill their obligation that's guaranteed by the First Amendment, by the way.
Yeah, and it's a really useful report. And in my recent Gaslight Gazette, I recommended it as a great media literacy resource because the work you guys compiled there, it's really clear and accessible. And it was the index was accompanied by a publication titled "A More Perfect Media: Saving America's Fourth Estate from Billionaires, Bro, Oligarchy, and Trump." And you authored this piece, and it includes a lot. I'd like to kind of get into it, but can you kind of summarize what folks can find in this piece, which I think they can get for free at freepress.net?
Yeah,
right?
that's right. You can go to freepress.net and read it. So we did the Media Capitulation Index, which looks at the 35 most powerful companies across all these media sectors, and we analyzed them with this online resource. We assigned what we call a chicken rating to the companies. If you were a completely independent company, we gave you a star, but then we assigned from 1 to 5 chickens to each company, 1 being vulnerable, 2 being compromising, 3 chickens being capitulating, 4 chickens was obeying, and 5 chickens, which is the worst rating, is pure propaganda. And so the Media Capitulation Index does that analysis, and it provides those rankings. And then the report, A More Perfect Media, actually went deeper in that analysis, and it looked at what was behind the sort of structural forces that were behind this media capitulation. And it also looked at the ways that these companies were capitulating to the Trump administration. In some cases, they were capitulating by giving payments. We saw a settlement where ABC settled, or where Disney rather settled with Trump, gave $16 million in a settlement because Trump alleged in what I believe was a meritless lawsuit that George Stephanopoulos had mislabeled him during one of the ABC News programs. We saw a case that Trump brought against CBS because of the way a 60 Minutes interview was edited, an interview with Kamala Harris that he said caused him personal anguish. Paramount decided to give Trump another $16 million that went to Trump's library. And we looked at that and realized that there were other forces at play. For example, both of these companies, in particular, Paramount, was also in the middle of getting federal approval for a multi-billion-dollar merger with Skydance. And in order to get that federal approval, they had to work with Brendan Carr, who is the FCC chairman. Brendan Carr has proven himself to be a very obedient Trump follower. He even has a gold Trump pin that he wears on his lapel, similar to ones that followers of Chairman Mao used in China in the 1960s. And so so Carr and Trump seemingly were working together to pressure these companies to capitulate, to settle this case, a meritless case, give Trump $16 million. And those are 2 cases that you may have heard about. But when we looked across all 35 of these companies, we found that it was a pattern. There was a pattern of capitulation in varying degrees. So A More Perfect Media looks at that, but it also looks at some structural solutions that we can make in order to prevent the fourth estate from failing to such a degree.
Yeah, I want to get into those and a couple other elements of it, but before I do, this study was written obviously before this happened, but since it's come out, Trump brought his lawsuit against the Wall Street Journal, which apparently was settled. Just do you have any thoughts on that in terms of how it fits with what you found in the Media Capitulation Index?
Oh yeah, I mean it's been pretty interesting because, as you know, the Wall Street Journal is owned by the Murdoch family, which also owns Fox News Channel and a number of other media outlets. So we were a bit surprised because a lot of the pressure that the Trump administration has been exerting has been against media companies that he perceives as his enemies. Now, Fox News, the Murdochs, there has been a somewhat tense relationship between Rupert Murdoch and Donald Trump over the years, but we thought that they were be considered friendlies. And so he was unhappy about a story the Wall Street Journal did, I think a legitimately reported story, tying Trump to Jeffrey Epstein through this drawing that Trump allegedly sent to Epstein on his birthday. I mean, Wall Street Journal, despite what you might think about their editorial page, their reporting page is very thorough. I think their brand is built on accuracy. If you are a business outlet, your accuracy in your reporting is a very important facet of your brand. This story, I'm sure, was vetted by an army of lawyers at the Wall Street Journal before they went to press. So I have a high degree of belief that they checked all of their sources many times over and that it was credible. But what we're seeing in all of these, whether it's the Wall Street Journal, whether it's ABC, whether it's CBS, is this pattern. It's emerging. Trump has figured out a way to extort money from media companies and get them to settle, which in his mind is an admission of guilt, and pay him money. And so I think, these are not anomalies. This is something that we're going to see increasingly every time a press report makes Trump administration angry. He'll express his outrage. It usually starts on Truth Social with a all caps post, whether he's angry at NBC or any other outlet. Then it goes over to his trusty chair, Brendan Karr at the FCC, who oftentimes launches these sort of investigations, asking questions about these media companies. And then there may be a lawsuit that's filed by Trump, and ultimately a settlement where the company, by virtue of settling, admits in some way that it made a mistake. So I expect to see more of this, which is deeply concerning, obviously. And I should add, one of the things that we found in this analysis of these 35 large media companies is that this sort of capitulation is really a facet of large, sprawling media conglomerates. And that's because they have so many conflicts of interests across their media companies. If you look at Amazon and Jeff Bezos, which owns the Washington Post, he also has a company called Blue Origin that is looking for billions of dollars in federal contracts for space exploration. The same is true for X through SpaceX. So when you have these large, sprawling conglomerates, the tendency of these owners to want to capitulate is higher and higher. So in addition to the finding of this worrying pattern of caving to official pressure, we also found that smaller outlets tend to be more independent because they don't have those conflicts of interest. They're really focused on their news product and not on getting contracts, whether it's for space exploration. There are a lot of companies that are looking for AI contracts from the government. The other companies are looking for the FCC to approve mergers so they can grow their conglomerates even larger. They just have a number of entanglements with government that makes it very difficult for them to speak truth to power, to act as a check against the kind of abuses that we're seeing in this authoritarian-minded regime.
Hey folks, Nolan Higdon here, interrupting real quick just to ask a favor. Can you please like, follow, comment, and subscribe to the podcast? It really helps get the show out to more people. If you also have a couple extra bucks in your pocket, please consider becoming a paid subscriber. You can go to patreon.com/Disinfo Detox and you become a paid subscriber for as little as $5 a month. It really helps get the show to more people, allows me to bring in more people and create more content. You can find a link to that in the show description. All right, let's get back to the show. Yeah, it's really fascinating to hear you say that because you tell me what you think of this. My perspective has been for decades, myself and other media researchers and critics and organizations like Free Press have talked about the influence that this corporate money has on the ways in which news is reported or sometimes not reported in some cases. And I don't know, I always felt like we were sort of kind of dismissed, but now in Trump like 2.0, it seems like more and more of the public is waking up to the fact of how these economic conflicts of interest, particularly with government contracts, as you just laid out, does affect the reporting. So is there maybe some kind of, I don't know, opportunity here for organizations like Free Press to say like, well, this is what we've been warning about, the ways in which this money is a conflict of interest. I don't know. What do you make of that?
I mean, unfortunately, had to get this bad for a proof of concept for Free Press, and through from our founding 20 years ago, we've always found media consolidation to be problematic, and it's not only problematic because of this phenomenon of capitulation, but you'll find, for example, when broadcast companies or newspapers go through these large mergers where they buy up more and more local outlets, they'll often say, you should approve this merger. It's good for the public interest. There are synergies and economies of scale that will benefit these news organizations. And every time I hear the word synergies or economies of scale coming from a media owner, I know what that means. And we've seen it over the last 30 years, really since the 1996 Telecommunications Act, which kicked out a lot of the limits to media consolidation, is that as companies merge and consolidate, they lay off journalists. Newsrooms have been hollowed out. There are news deserts that are spreading, hundreds of counties across the country where people don't have a local source of news and information. And that has a direct negative impact on their ability to engage in our democracy. And when the founding fathers, wrote the First Amendment, their understanding was that a free press was essential to a functioning, healthy democracy. That you needed a free press to fight the forces of tyranny. And I don't think the founding fathers could envision that, about 250 years later, in the 21st century, you would have these massively powerful media conglomerates where they have the First Amendment right to do the work that's required of a democracy. But because of these conflicts of interest, they're not interested in fulfilling that obligation.
And let me get your take on something else. One of the things I've sort of discovered over the years that folks in news media, journalists themselves, they feel like there's something unethical or wrong with covering their own industry. And I don't necessarily mean critiquing each other, but like, there's basically a plague of journalists being attacked across the country. And nobody knows about it because journalists won't report on it because journalists think they shouldn't cover their own industry. And, I've talked about this with a lot of journalists, and I wonder, doing the work you do, you also talk to journalists, and we hear a lot of critiques about the organizations. And I recognize this is somewhat anecdotal, but what's your perspective on how journalists feel about seeing this capitulation of these, major companies in their industry?
I think they're interested, but also somewhat concerned from their own personal professional perspective. The media doesn't like to report on itself. And that's especially true of these larger media conglomerates. And even though companies like CNN have a media reporter and Brian Stelter and others have media reporters, there's been this traditionally uneasy relationship between reporters and their owners when it comes to reporting on the media. And this is somewhat anecdotal, but, in promoting the Media Capitulation Index and the More Perfect Media paper that accompanied it, we decided to do an alternative approach. We went out to newsletter publishers. We went out to podcasters. We went out to the sort of smaller but growing core of independent media and asked them whether they would want to, like you, we wanted to talk about the Media Capitulation Index. And we got Margaret Sullivan, who was a former public editor for the New York Times, served a similar role at the Washington Post, and then left to start her own Substack newsletter, which is followed by almost everyone in the media industry. We gave her an exclusive. We said, do you want to cover the Media Capitulation Index? Because we knew that a lot of traditional media outlets, and I can't speak for Brian Stelter, but he's at CNN, so we decided not to approach Brian, instead to approach Margaret, and she was very interested. And this kind of alternative approach to PR work, I guess you would call it, was very successful because we knew that through Margaret we would be getting to a lot of those people. That is read, and in fact, I won't say his name, but one of the owners of one of the larger media companies in the country contacted me of concern. Somebody read it and handed it to him, and he wrote me a personal email.
Oh, nice.
We had a pleasant exchange, I would say, but I can tell that they're reading it more than they're reporting on it.
Good. Well, still, they should read it. And there's another portion of your report that stood out to me because, I covered the first Trump administration, as so many folks did, and particularly in the left, you heard a lot of critiques of Trump for racism, and the issue of race was central. And at least from what I've seen in Trump 2.0, there's been kind of a dearth of conversation about race and racism. But your report didn't avoid that topic at all. Can you talk a little about
Sure.
what you found in media capitulation regarding race and racism?
Well, there's a history of media failure on race that certainly predates the Trump administration. You can go back all the way to Benjamin Franklin. His newspaper in Philadelphia would advertise for the capture of runaway slaves. And so you have this history of racism that's really baked into the media. And it also manifests itself in the ways that a lot of media companies really fail to cover communities of color. And when they do, they're often portrayed as being poor or crime-ridden. And so we talk some about that. But the other piece more recently is we've also tracked the capitulation or the backtracking on diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives at some of these larger companies. For example, Verizon was hoping to merge with Frontier Communications, both large telecommunications companies. And the merger was only approved by the FCC after they basically scrubbed their DEI initiatives at Verizon. And we've seen that at other companies. T-Mobile has done it as well because they're seeking to acquire more the public airwaves for their wireless services. They scrubbed a lot of their DEI initiatives. So this kind of history of racism is manifesting itself in a different way. The Trump administration Trump issued an executive order. It was one of the first orders that he issued against DEI initiatives in government, but also wanted to extend that to private companies. And he's using his ability to manipulate, to harass, to pressure these companies who are in many ways over a barrel because they need official approval of mergers. They're looking for friendly policies on a number of fronts. And to these companies and to their owners, the backtracking or the scrubbing of diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives for them is a small price to pay for the profits they can gain from going along with the Trump administration.
Excellent. Yeah, it's a really, really powerful part of the report. And I want to get to the end of the report talking about solutions. But before I do, I want to ask one other question of something in the news, just from your perspective. There was a big uproar years ago about the supposed TikTok ban, and it's been kicked down the road, and changes have occurred now to it, and it's kind of in flux. It looks like TikTok's going to be fine. It's going to make some concessions to the Trump administration and be able to operate in the United States. But we didn't talk about social media too much today. We talked about it a little bit. What did you make of the TikTok ban, and how does it kind of fit with overall what you're seeing in the Media Capitulation Index?
Well, we were very concerned. There are certainly First Amendment ramifications when the government tries to pressure a media company to change its practices in this way. But there is also an incentive in the Trump administration to see TikTok, which is currently owned by ByteDance, a Chinese-controlled company, or Chinese-owned company. There's some question as to whether the Chinese government actually controls it. There's interest in Trump in seeing an American owner, right? Trump is a media owner himself. He owns Truth Social. It's the source of most of his wealth. But he has always been fascinated and really, interested in turning media into a megaphone for the MAGA movement and a megaphone for Donald Trump himself. And in TikTok, in the law that was passed last year, forcing TikTok to sell its controlling interests, or ByteDance to sell its controlling interest in TikTok, he saw an opportunity to get some of his buddies, right, in place to purchase TikTok. And there are a number of suitors who are allied with Donald Trump, billionaires, who would have an interest in purchasing TikTok. So while he's delayed the sale of TikTok a number of times, I think what he's trying to do is get all of his ducks in a row, not chickens, but ducks in a row, to see a deal go through that would put control of TikTok, a very influential video platform with billions of users, in the hands of an ally. So obviously concern there as well, right? This sort of entanglement between government and the media that poses a fundamental threat to our democracy.
Nice. Yeah, and I appreciate that. And we've, talked thus far about the problems as they are with media. And like I said, one of the things I really like about this report, it gives you some action items here. You have some solutions, recommendations, policies. You don't necessarily need to go through all of them, but I wonder what are some of the ones that stand out that you want the audience to hear. But I'm also going to recommend the audience go check out this free resource and read them all.
Yeah, I've outlined them there briefly. I would say one thing that's really important, and again, a lot of these are policy solutions, and we admit that the current policy environment is not very conducive to fixing the media. Donald Trump would rather see a dysfunctional media system that he can manipulate. But one of the things, and I think this is important because it was only recently that Congress, after trying since the Nixon administration, has fully funded the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting is the entity that provides funding to your local NPR, PBS affiliates around the country. These are by and large much loved institutions, and the public has said time and again that it thinks public funding to public media is a good idea. Well, the Trump administration doesn't agree with the public in this case and has succeeded in completely defunding the CPB. So one of the recommendations that we have, again, a little pie in the sky, given the current political climate, is not only to fully refund public media, but to even go further. And you look at most developed democracies, modern democracies around the world have a very robust funding of their public media infrastructure. Here in the United States, it's a pittance. This was even before we defunded it. We didn't pay much. And I think you have to create a more robust public media system, more robust public media infrastructure, non-commercial media infrastructure, in order to have an effective counterweight to commercial media. At the moment, we have a hyper-commercial media system that, as I've discussed, it has a tendency to capitulate. And if you create a more independent, publicly funded, non-commercial media system, it will offer an antidote. It will give people more choices in media to find vital information about civic affairs and everything they need to be informed citizens.
Excellent. Like I said, it's a great report. I encourage all you detoxers out there to go download it, check it out. Tim, can you remind folks where they can go to follow more of your work?
Sure. You can find it at freepress.net. And we have also found that if you do a search on Google asking the question, who owns the media? One of the first answers you'll get is a link to our Media Capitulation Index.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. Thank you so much for being on the Disinfo Detox, Tim. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
All right. Thank you, Detoxers, for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
Yo, Detoxers, this is the Disinfo Detox. Want to keep media literacy alive and kicking? Chip in at patreon.com/disinfodetox. Broke? We get it. Just like, comment, follow, or share. Even your hate helps the algorithm. Thank you for supporting the Disinfo Detox, where media literacy meets breaking news.